We've got a great panel in store here. Modernization without disruption. So I'll be moderating it. Mick will invite you back to the stage here. And then he will be joined by Kevin Hansen, who's the CTO for MFGS Inc., and Doug Johnson, who's the Vice President of Product Management at Rocket Software. So I'll give you a little bit about Kevin and Doug. Kevin, again, the CTO of MFGS Inc., is a leading IT modernization and cybersecurity initiatives for MFGS Inc. Kevin helps customers and partners alike realize tangible value by advancing digital transformation goals aligned with organizational strategy. Kevin joined Micro Focus over 25 years ago, and he has worked directly with the U.S. government customers on technology implementations and cybersecurity architectures in various roles since then. He has also been a key contributor to many R&D projects, strategic campaigns, and as a technical advisor. His expertise includes developing and implementing digital resilience strategies, as with the Digital Mission Dominance Model by MFGS Inc., to continuously improve and optimize software delivery management, high-value systems modernization, and hybrid cloud operations with comprehensive security built in. Doug Johnson. Doug is the Vice President of Product Management at Rocket Software. Over the unstructured data portfolio with a 27-year track record of building teams and technologies. Prior experiences include managing a wide range of mission-critical software products, including categories such as open source content and process management, enterprise security, healthcare solutions using machine learning, and other core infrastructure software. In addition to an MBA, Doug is also an accomplished violinist, having toured with artists such as Sarah Brightman, Phantom of the Opera, and Diana Ross, Moody Blues, and Ray Charles. Wow. All right, Doug, Kevin, Mick, please join us. All right, so the title of this is Modernization Without Disruption. So you have to add value. You have to keep organizations moving forward, meeting mission. You took the seat closest. So I'll start off with you. When we think about everything that Mick talked about, the vastness of the mission, the data sets, the very real and overwhelming responsibility of national security in the most dangerous world that we've seen since 1945, if you measure it by terms of armed conflict around the world. You've got to keep all that going, but you got to get better at it. You got to improve. How do you add value? Thoughts like what is the best approaches, things as we incorporate more data, more automation, and more AI into old processes, procedures, and technologies, right?
Yeah, I guess what first comes to mind is something Mick touched on around getting your data right. Having visibility to all your data, literally every day, you likely have systems within your environment generating, in Mick's case, terabytes of data. So there's certainly application data, there's operational data, there's mission data, and it's being generated at just a rapid rate. So getting your data right, having visibility into that data, where it's at any point in time, categorizing it, and tagging it, having the right meta tags there. So being able to operationalize the data is a huge step, and I think Mick hit on that pretty good. And I'll emphasize visibility, not just of the data, but of the infrastructure that current systems rely on. To tackle a modernization project, you really need to have clear visibility of the infrastructure that's being used. Certainly from an application standpoint, there's a lot of dependencies on infrastructure, on different data sources. So having that visibility throughout the application, throughout the infrastructure, throughout your data are all fundamental to then prioritizing and being very pragmatic about what you're going to approach from a modernization standpoint. And being pragmatic is important when you want to keep the critical stuff up and running and still being able to transform at the same time. So start with that.
Okay. Doug, I want to hear about touring with Ray Charles. No. So if at a base element, let's just say there's new data and old data. Mick, you talked a lot about ingesting, tagging, processing new data and the challenges that come with that. But then there's the old data, and we have a ton of old data. How do we bring these together? What are good processes, ideas for bringing them together to help our decision-making processes in organizations excel today?
Yeah, well, in that context, what we found is on the commercial side is that the idea that you're going to take existing systems that are there, present, operating, running the business. You were kind of talking about the business processes today, but wanting to change them. Step one can't be, okay, I'm going to bring everything in, have a huge data project, and then 3 years get value. Right? You have to think differently about how you can incrementally add value as part of that. And so that's what we've really seen on the commercial side is, are there tools and techniques that can help you operationalize that data in these AI contexts rapidly, but also keep in mind that the security practices and such that exist in those applications need to be carried forward in an automated fashion. And in the last thing I'll just say about this, it's all about what are the new use cases someone is trying to do. What we've seen on the commercial side is there's appetite, of course, to get more value out of some of these newer technologies, but it is challenging the way things are done. And there are new ways of taking advantage of experiences and what is the mission there that's trying to be advantaged. And we can talk more about that in some use cases in just a moment.
Sure. And Mick, I'm interested as prioritization is hard. It's, we can't do everything at once, but everything needs done. As you think about this from an enterprise level, a DoD level, and you're looking at it, how do you begin prioritizing like those next steps to move mission forward, to move value forward, to move decision making forward?
Yeah. So the first thing to do, like I kind of talked about, is I believe in the new business processes, but you've got to enable the current business processes and add value there. I also think that that'll have an overarching effect of building confidence in AI so that the next round of decision makers are much more comfortable with it and willing to change the way they do business. So trying to come in right now and say, hey, it's a completely new way of doing things is going to be a lot harder than, hey, I can use AI to do this for you now in your current process and add value and give you more time back, speed to market, whatever. Find the value there, and you'll get adoption at a higher rate.
Okay. And this bit when and I maybe oversimplify things, but at the risk of doing that, when I think about AI, I think about it in three parts. One is processing power, which is the semiconductors, and then now increasingly the power that it takes to process it. It's the algorithms in some form or fashion, and then the data. We're focused on data now, but as you bring all this together to help organizations move forward, and I'll turn it over to anybody. How should we think about pulling that all together to add that value, knowing that we don't want to do a rip and replace, but we need to increment it out. So how do we bring processes, the technology to drive mission forward incrementally? How do we do that? And I'm sorry to go back to keep harping on prioritization,
right.
But it's important when there's just so much changing so fast.
Sure. Well, I think part of the process goes to your DevSecOps plans and your agility and ability to, use small increments of releases to push into production after, heavily testing and heavily validating those processes. Continuously improving on that delivery of capability or product is important. So measuring your progress as you're driving new product or new services through your DevSecOps. And that's a whole nother area I think AI can contribute when it comes to performance-based metrics and prediction analysis around feature capability. Your operational data has a lot of intelligence in it if you can make sense of it. And so as it's generated, being able to not only monitor, but being able to predict where the impact of change is going to be. All of those things can affect your ability to actually get it out to production and in use by the workforce. So that's going to be a critical part.
Yeah.
I have something to add to that. What we've also seen is thinking about carefully some of the things that you were talking about kind of the architecture that you have today, but also how you're kind of building that for the future is really important. I'll give you a couple examples if I could, or at least one, maybe I'll start with one, is what we've seen is, to your point around kind of processes, and you have to kind of fit into what you're doing today. We have many use cases where on the commercial side, people have very service functions, where they use kind of traditional, like, I want to find information, get an insight, get that answer, and move forward. Maybe it's kind of a service function or whatnot. But we've seen kind of an opportunity with respect to some of the Gen AI technologies to actually not just kind of get a list of results, but maybe get an answer, an insight, something that's more nuanced. And it kind of brings all the things together that we were talking about. One of them is maybe pulling data from multiple systems, honoring the security policies, even some of those systems that might be kind of older systems together with some of the newer, but also then feeding into the LLM, but carefully doing that. There were some good questions about hallucinations and the strategy that you have around that. What we found is finding the right data to ask LLMs smaller gets better results. And then the tool change that you have with that. And then Cory, you were kind of mentioning around algorithms, not tying yourself to just one approach, but having a pluggable approach really helped those use cases that we had. So I was highlighting the use case of like a service request, very common thing. We can change it from kind of a search paradigm where you're getting a list of results and you have to parse through them to actually more targeted answers based upon what the business has access to, honoring those rules and beyond. So I just thought I would kind of try to tie back a couple elements that might fit into that on how that architecture can make that difference.
Yeah, that's interesting. Mick, do you have any thoughts?
We can kind of build on that. Like LLMs, again, they're easier said than done, but you can use them for very limited targeted things right now, like taking and compiling data that we validate to just present it. Sometimes, like a ChatGPT often says it better than I would say it. But we control the underlying data, right? Like it's not making a decision at that point, it's just giving us ideas. There's definitely a lot of examples like that. But I would also add that being able to help find, compile, and use data in a zero trust environment is key right now, and that's wide open, because everyone's rolling out zero trust on their own. So if you could figure out how to do that, and the challenges of that are, if everything's encrypted, how do you do a search? Right? I mean, you hold it in indices, how well are you describing it, making sure that your catalogs have good descriptions but not classified descriptions. So that kind of space, there's a lot of room for improvement and help.
Kevin, do you have the thoughts on the zero trust and the challenges with that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly data is an important part of zero trust. But like we've talked about, the technology's there to support much more limited access to data, if you will. Being able to separate the fields of data, or the encryption of the field data versus, bulk encryption, or transport encryption. Field-based encryption that leverages access controls. Again, I think metadata is important, in an important role to play around who gets access to that. But zero trust is certainly front and center from a cyber perspective. So, getting the data right is important.
And Doug, as you think about, the private sector is revenue generated or revenue motivated. The government, in a lot of ways, is rules confined. How does that impact this conversation? That very, I'll just say the reality of that. Like, how does that impact this conversation?
Yeah, I think about it in two ways. I think every organization that is very process-focused is always looking for improvement. So that's the commonality between the way I kind of think about it in the commercial and the government side. The area that, and so in that sense, these capabilities around AI and bringing together data and the processes and such really have a lot of match. The areas where, obviously, all organizations are interested in security and compliance. For instance, we serve a lot of banks, insurance companies, which they themselves kind of have an overlay of government oversight. And so that is a huge area where some of our technologies we think are relevant in the government context. I think where it's different and where it's more challenging is the deep rule set. You were kind of talking about the technical environment, the rules that are established at different standards, and being able to fit into that. There's only one side of that equation that's going to change, and it's on the vendor side to kind of fit into what's happening there. And that's probably the opportunity and the challenge from vendors like us, and we're ready for the challenge. So.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about, say, use cases. We've heard predictive analysis. We've heard at least a saying that I'm familiar with, so I'll share with you. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so you've got to be able to do that. What are some things that maybe we'll just go down the lines of things that are working well to, we can objectively say this is working. This is working the way we want it to and working well, and maybe an example or two where things didn't work that way.
I don't know that I have an example handily ready. One point I want to make is measuring value and the delivery of value. It's not revenue, but it's actually value to the end user. And so adding capability specific to your processes, to your tool chains, aggregating that value and then measuring it with end users, being able to support the decisions and values that you came up with.
Yeah, I think what I would say is that what we've seen is what's working well is when organizations can really work to scale their practices. So for instance, one of the areas that can be a real challenge is when you have a new project, a new initiative that you want to embark on. Many times early on, there's kind of an analysis that occurs. Well, what data is it? Where does it come from? How can I bring it together? Well, what we've done is we've kind of looked at, are there automated ways of doing that? Looking at data lineage, where applications have this. And rather than having humans go through and try to curate where is all my data and put it in a catalog, we actually automate that and fit it into the standards that the government has. And so that's what's working well, is when organizations can take advantage of that automation to scale. Now, despite that rosy picture, there's the other side of what's not working well. And I think there's a thinking that can happen of incrementally improving processes, and we need to do that. We need to honor the existing things, look for quick wins. And some of these technologies are so transformative in how they can actually change the way that government operates, the way that maybe the battlefield of the future can operate. If we don't do that, it's a big risk. And so thinking big, but also having those incremental wins is, I think, an opportunity, but also challenge, because having that right mindset is harder than it sounds.
Yeah, I can kind of take this in another direction too. On the same track. What you can measure is important, but I've chased this rabbit before. It doesn't always give you the right answer. So we end up measuring things that we can measure, even though, like, how many times did somebody access a data set? Okay, but what's the usefulness of that? What reports were generated, what decisions were made off of it? And the problem in our environment, and I'm sure everywhere else, but I know in our environment, is those decisions get made by a human being, the machine can't measure that. They don't know that we did this, we did that. So there's that. So following the data through the cycle and getting feedback on what decisions were made with it and the outcome of it, that would be extremely valuable in the future. So I would welcome that.
Yeah. All right. Before we get to our table discussions, I want to open it up. Are there questions from the group that we would have for the panel? Sir.
Yeah, sir. Brussels City Police Advisor. The Netherlands Police adopt an AI to put focus on those who they are misusing the child benefit. And this application mislead to the Netherlands government, and Netherlands government resign from the government. So what I want to say, there are many risks to adopt AI technology today. So what are the steps that we can take at government level to avoid these risks?
The steps we can take at so the thing that's throwing me off is I'm not qualified to speak about police. That is a completely different operation with a whole different set of rules than us. So I would never be involved in anything like that. So with that said, I mean, that's what our oversight and compliance rules are about, right? Like how we use the data ethically, that's regulated. There's laws about that. We follow those laws. The promise, it's a balance. It's like a risk balance almost. But you know, how much is enough freedom, and you know, can we take more risk or can we take less risk? Like how much risk are we willing to take by not using these tools? I think does that answer your question?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Sure.
Yes, and you mentioned that the data now it's rather prefer, instead of humans doing all the compilation data, you guys are automating. That's what you mentioned, right? So my question is, I think that we just can take data and automate. You need a step previously that to filter the data. It essentially is curating data before you take in what you really want. So in the filtering step, what you do is you first curate in the sense that you put the features that you want in your data, such that then you separate pretty much the garbage versus the really good data that you want them to automate. But you have to do that before, not just take everything, just because humans, of course, I agree should be automated because there's so much data out there. So it's a need to put, what is your comment on that? Because it's very important. Well, by the way, I'm in private sector, that's my company does. They are consultants and we provide those kind of services to whoever needs in terms of risk management strategy. So that's what I was asking, because we go first in the state of filtering the data. And then after that, we can automate whatever you want, but now you can really curate the good data, basically the parameters that you say, my data I want A, B, C, D. Everything else is discarded. And then you have really nice curated data that now you can automate, put it into your algorithms, and train or whatever you want to do with that.
Well, yeah, I think that's a big topic for sure. But let me give you the short answer of what I can best see. I think there was kind of two elements I was talking about earlier. One is around project selection. You know, when you're looking at a project, making sure that it has the bounds of the data that make sense. You know, you were commenting that just, you know, we don't have a data problem. We have a kind of getting results problem, right? So just bringing all the data into a given project obviously doesn't make sense. But, and And that's where the automation that I was talking about comes in. We have kind of a data lineage capability that can kind of look across your data sets, bring it into your catalog, and help you know and select what is the best data for a given project. But then once you're operationalizing data, that filtering goes through many layers. We'll just kind of summarize it to say, there's the way that you can smartly engage your AI layer on how you're querying the LLM. I kind of talked about curating it, so you're asking just and sending it just the right data. But interestingly, what we've also found is mirroring kind of unstructured with structured data actually gets better results. And so thinking in that data set, curating it in a way, but then the techniques that you have there around getting good insights that can help those that are operating with it is a key. I'm happy to talk to you more about it. I hope that's useful.
Thank you. Ma'am?
So I'm working in the acquisition side of things, and I think acquisition is right for modernization, because you've got set rules, you've got defined processes, but you've got acquisition experts who are not data experts. How do you flip? I mean, you've got an area that's right for modernization, but how do you get there without having to actually bring in an entire team of data experts and AI experts so we can move? I basically been given the edict to put myself out of business. Because I'm the document specialist. So how do I put myself out of business? And secondary, do you know of anybody who's already done all the work that I need to do so I can jump in?
Anybody from the private sector care to answer how you put yourself out of business?
So that's where that explainable part comes back in, like being able to sit down with the practitioners and the decision makers and explain, like, this is how you do it, this is how the computer can do it, and then you can do something else. You know, I don't know a contracting officer in the world that doesn't need more time, right? So, like, that first appealing to your ability to make their life easier is probably, that's the key to get in, right? There's still going to be a decision maker. It just, your job will look different. You'll still have a job. Less tedious. No, I know, but that's kind of the buy-in, right? If you can explain through them, all right, this is how you do things now. This is how you could still do. This is how you could do them in the future, with you spending much less time, you know, doing this and correlating that and signing this. I think that would be the approach I would take.
Right, but it's the question of how do we go on technical, you know, we've got technical experts in the logistics space. How do we get them to actually start doing this work? I mean, do we need, with AI, do we still need data experts, maybe AI experts to come in, or that's like Mick or GPT and give us what we need in order to start playing with it? I mean, there are layers to this, though. You just, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like there's the planning part and there's the execution part. In the planning part, you would need, I think, data experts to work with the domain expert, you know, the person who understands, the contracting officers. Once that was established and you built the product, then yeah, it's much more automated at that point.
Well, I was just going to amplify that to say that as part of that kind of data expert side, which I couldn't agree with more, is there's also, what does kind of work yourself out of a job mean? I'm thinking it probably means make the effort so efficient that it just takes fewer people to kind of engage in that process. And one of the areas we've seen is like, one of the areas that would be involved in acquisitions is kind of all the contracts management portion of that activity. And we've actually won some awards around that, about kind of taking that and maybe standardizing things. Standard questions where someone would have to kind of read contracts and see that similarity, turning that into just an activity that moves much faster through some of those areas. I'd be happy to talk to you offline about some of that, but that's an area where I think the use cases of the art of the possible together with the data team and the right vendors can really make a difference.
Okay, we got one more question here.
It's not one.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I work with Space Force. I do cyber planning, which in the Pentagon means it's all budget, right? Sounds cool. But some of the problems we're trying to solve right now are, where do we do compute? Do we do it in space? If we're doing Indo-PACOM, that's literally half the surface of the Earth and it's almost all water. where do you do compute in a denied environment? And so we have Ohm's law. But right now, we're brute forcing AI with compute. Are you aware of any sort of improvements? Because we see AI, the LLMs now reaching kind of an efficient frontier for effectiveness. Do we see algorithms requiring less compute as they get better? How do we do that? Does that make sense? So we've got Ohm's law on one side helping us compute better, but on the AI side, how do we get to a smaller, without regard to Ohm's law, how do we get to a smaller footprint that's required for both power and compute?
Well, this is where I think you were kind of talking about algorithms and the LLMs and kind of the compute kind of fit into that. Are there more efficient algorithms? This is definitely an area where I think someone was mentioning this earlier. You know, we're seeing a lot of small language models be effective. And on the commercial side, particularly for customers that have systems that are on premise, the idea of a GPU laying around is quite new to them, as an example. And so we've also seen models that can be more operate against the CPU. And then lastly, I would say what we're doing on the vendor side is, are there ways, I was mentioning this earlier, of sending less data to the LLM, asking it to do less work? And you actually get more better insights. But interestingly enough, number two is it's faster latency, cheaper. So those are some of the elements. Looking at the space of these smaller language models that are more purpose-built, things that might run on different architectures, including not GPU-based. And then lastly, are there ways that you interacted with the data and the LLM to be even more efficient? All three of those things come into the play. That's what we've seen.
Everyone, we're teeing up for a break here, but I want you to join me in thanking our panel.